Welcome to our podcast to discuss the EU response to COVID-19, which is supported by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. Today, our guests are Wilhelm Hofmeister, Director of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation office in Spain and Portugal, and Duarte Marques, member of the Portuguese Parliament. Welcome to both. Wilhelm and Duarte, this week the heads of state and heads of government met to discuss the EU response to the unprecedented economic shock caused by COVID-19. And surprisingly, the Council approved the three-pronged package which had been previously announced and consisted of an unemployment reinsurance scheme called SURE, a European Stability Mechanism loans for health-related spending, and another scheme with loans from the European Investment Bank to support small and medium-sized enterprises. There was also an agreement to start discussions on a recovery fund. One important takeaway from this meeting is that the German Chancellor Angela Merkel said ahead of the meeting that Germany should be prepared in spirit of solidarity and over a limited period of time to make quite different contributions to the European budget, and that means significantly higher contributions. Now, in backing a rise in contributions, Germany is actually leading the way for smaller European countries that tend to be less inclined to contribute more to the EU budget. Do you think that this fully overcomes earlier accusations of lack of solidarity among EU countries?
Well, we have to see, because this accusation of lack of solidarity don't come from Germany, but they were directed, among other states, to Germany and others. Unfortunately, we had to observe that the first reactions of many European states, not only Germany but others, was to look after their own country and to close the borders and to limit exchange, limit traveling of people, but also exchange of goods and so on. And so this was obviously a very complicated reaction, and we have listened to the statement of the President of the Commission in the European Parliament some 3 weeks now ago, where she said she was very surprised and very worried about the situation of the EU because the good spirit of solidarity and cooperation was missed during the first reactions. On the other hand, we have to see that the European Union is not in charge in the health sector, and so there are no tools or instruments of the European Union to act with regard to this pandemic. And though the states had, of course, in a first move, they had to look after their own instruments and apply their own instruments, which are all designed for their own countries. And the next point is we did not expect the virus to spread as fast as it did finally, and as far as it did also. We did not expect, Spain, for instance, did not expect the virus to come to the country as quick as it came, and in such a. So I say, yes, at the first moment, it was a kind of a lack of, I would not say solidarity, but it was a lack of thinking about European common response. Yeah. Nevertheless, in a second move, I think it was obvious that we had to look for common European replies, mainly because the effects of the virus on the economy and on the societies and the health systems and so on and so forth were obvious, yeah, or became obvious. And so it was clear that no country can act alone. And so I would say in Germany, we knew from the beginning a European response means also a kind of commitment of Germany, financial commitment. And now we have the discussion on how and how much we do this. But I think Germany is really able and prepared now to demonstrate solidarity with the other countries of the Union.
Very well. Thank you very much. Duarte, about this idea of a recovery fund. There are important differences between countries. Spain and Italy first led the way to call for a novel type of instrument. In this week, still this week, Spain argued that it would be important to create a perpetual bond issuance by the EU, whilst Germany, for instance, has expressed preference for using the EU budget and enlarging the use of the treaty's Article 122 for more than just the employment package. There is also a split, apparently, between countries that was present in the meeting, between countries that wish that the financial support take the form of loans, which means they would be paid back by each member state, or grants that effectively would amount to fiscal transfers. Now, the President of the European Commission, von der Leyen, suggested that it could be possible to a combination of both. Do you think that this would be enough to convince both sides to reach an agreement relatively quickly?
I think Spanish and the Italian government, they are looking for the easiest way to solve their problems. We should accept that. I think the German proposal to use this article more than once, not only for the SURE program for the employment, but to other instruments, could be the right way to go. I think there is a big difference between countries. It's not about the mechanism or about the instrument is going to be used, but especially about the loans or the grants. Not only if the countries have to pay this debt of these amounts to the Commission or to the Council, but especially if they are giving it as a loan or as a guarantee to the companies. And there is a big clash, I think, between both economies, the different economies in Europe. Some countries are helping their enterprises directly with money, with grants, and others are just giving loans or guaranteeing loans. And I think for the internal market, this will be a very, very big problem. I think this topic was mentioned yesterday in the Council as well, because during the recovery time, some companies from some countries are going to be ready to work without nothing to pay back to their countries, and the others have to pay the loans and all the amounts of money they have to spread for the economy. So the internal market is not going to be the same, because in the same competition, in the same markets, countries, enterprises from different countries, we're going to be working with different conditions in the same markets. So this is going to be a very big problem also for Europe. But according to the Council yesterday, and answering to your question, I think Germany in this point is in the middle of the bridge. I think it's trying to find a solution that could be helpful for countries like Portugal, Spain, or Italy, and trying to convince the others from the north, Sweden and Denmark, to socialist governments that are trying to block all of this, not anymore the Dutch government, but as I was told, the Swedish government and the Danish government. And so I think Germany is going to play a very important role to try to find a balance between these two positions, to try to have a kind of a sample of loans and grants, and using the EU bonds through the Commission. And I think it could be a very good solution. For countries like Portugal, the important thing nowadays is to have liquidity to invest and to help the companies, I think.
Thank you. And Wilhelm, talking about this Article 122, the number 2, which is the one that has been referred to, it states, where a member state is in difficulties or is seriously threatened with severe difficulties caused by natural disasters or exceptional occurrences beyond its control, the Council, on a proposal from the Commission, may grant, under certain conditions, Union financial assistance to the member state. Now, this appears to be the legal basis that will end up being used for the EU Recovery Fund, as Duarte has said. It is also quite vague. And so the question, as it probably should be, but the question is whether it will be possible to reach an agreement anytime soon, because the point that Duarte makes is a very important one. Whilst we're talking about differences in how countries are able to support their countries, and that becomes even more difficult for a country like Italy that has two issues. It has the issue of being one of the countries that suffered the most from this COVID crisis. And adding to this, it is also one of the countries with the largest debt. So it limits its response. And this article would probably help overcome this difficulty. Now, do you think it would be possible to reach an agreement anytime soon, particularly given that we are expecting, or we're asking the Commission to provide a draft of a plan regarding which sectors and which economies need more support in the space of 2 weeks, which might be a tall order given the extent of the crisis. So do you think it will be soon enough to kickstart the economies that have fallen off the cliff?
Well, these are different aspects. First, I think this Article 122 is fortunately flexible enough to allow different instruments, old ones and new ones, without changing the treaties and without major legal difficulties. You know that the question of Eurobonds is a question which is also in legal terms very complicated, at least in some countries, not at least in Germany. So I think this recovery fund, as it had been discussed yesterday by the heads of government, I suppose that at the end of the day we will have a double mechanism. This one mechanism will consist of a kind of loans, yeah, offered by the European Commission or by the European Union, or been supported by the budget, which does not mean necessarily that the country, the member countries, really have to give money, but they will give a kind of assurance for the loans which the Commission will hand over to the countries. And the Commission, of course, will look for the money at the financial market and will transfer these loans to the countries. And the other line will be subsidies via the extended EU budget. And it is obvious that Germany, in both cases, in both lines, will have a major contribution or commitment. Germany will have to, as all the member states, will have to increase their contributions. And as Germany is the biggest contributor, this means that also Germany has to contribute more. If I'm not completely wrong in my mathematics, my knowledge of mathematics is not completely bad. I was looking, in Germany, we have so it's a product, the general product is 3.4 billion euros, and those 0.1 billion, 0.1% of our budget would mean around about 34 billion euros. So this, if there is an increase of the budget to 1.2%, actually they are discussing about this, or maybe even more, I don't know. This would mean that Germany would pay 34 billion or even more to the budget of the Union for the next 2 or 3 weeks. Actually, they are speaking about 2 years, but I can imagine that at the end of the day, if you have once decided on these things, you know, though it is always difficult to step back. So I think Germany is prepared to make this contribution, which is quite a lot of money in terms of direct payment to the budget. And on the other hand, Germany also will stay or will reply or be responsible for the other part, which may probably be some kind of loans to the countries. The other question is the decision on the priorities. Of course, this has to be discussed with the member states. So we have to see, you mentioned already the position of the Nordic states, of the Netherlands and the other Nordic states, who are still demanding a kind of conditionality to some transfer. So we have to see negotiations in the next weeks. So I see much more flexibility in Germany. I see also much more disponibility or flexibility in the public opinion. If I look for the newspapers and also those papers or those statements who in the past have been strictly against Eurobonds and other commitments, I see much more flexibility actually in Germany, and also at the political level, I see much more flexibility to have this kind of new financial commitment of the European Union, also in the financial sector.
Thank you. That is very interesting. And an additional question: do you think that the fact that having a specific plan in terms of sector would ease negotiations? Because I think one of the fears that well, let's call net contributors countries, those countries that tend to contribute more to the EU budget, some of the fears sometimes are that those funds might be spent on policies that they would not implement in their own countries because they do not believe that they're the right ones. So having a plan, do you feel that that would help public opinion accepting that having a plan that would be well, it would be a broad-based plan looking at specific sectors and specific instruments would help negotiations and bring over to and convince those countries to actually put the money basically in?
Well, first we have in the case of Spain and Italy, I see that they are very strictly against conditionality, because this would mean some kind of conditionality. So they feel hurt, heavily hurt by the virus already, and and I think politically it is complicated at this moment to demand more submission under certain kind of common regulations, so certain kinds of conditions. So this is a politically sensible issue at the moment, especially for Spain and Italy. And on the other hand, I would say in the case of Germany, if a political leader like Merkel and some other guys from the CDU party, for instance, from the main government party, are flexible. So if I see that also in the area of economists and political opinion makers in some important newspapers, and so I see a lot of flexibility, a lot of understanding. Even some of the very conservative economists who some years ago were strictly against a kind of Eurobonds now showed rather considerable flexibility. Also within the CDU parties, there are some people who are much more flexible. I would say this is not an issue for Germany. The main issue is that the EU gets the instruments to act, and of course it has to act responsibly with the funds, and there must be some agreements with the countries on how to spend the money, and there must be some areas where you can invest, and other areas where you probably you should consider also the terms of a general competition and the market in the European Union. But I think at the end of the day, we will not have so many restrictions when it comes to transfer the funds to the state it most needed.
Okay. Duarte, one other question about differences between countries. One of the first measures that was taken was by the European Commission, by the Competition Directorate General, that decided to waive the limitations imposed by state aid regulations. So this means that countries can almost freely support their companies, for instance, airline companies, which is
and many others.
And others, but that's an obvious example. It's also true that the countries, if this virus is pretty much indiscriminate when it comes to affecting people, the economic effects will be very different. And countries like Portugal and countries that depend a lot on services, particularly tourism, hotels and restaurants, etc., those types of services, which also tend to be countries that are less competitive than in the EU, will also suffer more economically. So you have, for countries like Portugal that depend a lot on tourism, on the other hand, that are very indebted already, although the situation improved in the last few years, and that will probably suffer more economically from this crisis. Do you think that this virus that was indiscriminate as a start will be will have quite dramatically different effects regarding, well, depending on whether you're a small, indebted and tourist dependent country, or whether you are a country like Germany, which has a well-diversified base of foreign economy?
It's obvious that for countries like Portugal, Spain, and Italy, and especially Portugal, we depend a lot on the tourism, on the money, on this side of the economy. And most of these companies, some hotels, restaurants, and so on, some of them made big investments during the last times, and they have to pay it during this crisis. So you can imagine that even if some companies are in a very good shape, they have to pay to banks the investment they made before. So that's why Portugal and the European Union, the Commission, started for helping this specific area of the touristic economy, the hotels, the restaurants, the travel agencies, and so on. That's why the first Portuguese package was for this. And the state heads, the permission from the Commission is not free, because the countries should have to ask for it. Mm-hmm. But this was the first stage. I read yesterday some data about the tourism. 50% of the tourism in the world starts in Europe. So the big clash of the tourism area, it will be in Europe, and countries like Italy, Spain, and Portugal will be really, really affected. That's why you need to pay attention for this area. And some hotels in Portugal, they say with less than 50% of the people, they cannot start working again. So they prefer to wait until next year to start again their activities, if the state doesn't fund salaries and so on. Otherwise, they prefer to be closed than to be open with 20% of the customers. But Inês, let me just say one other thing about the council yesterday. I think there were big expectations for this meeting, and some of them now, during the first hours after the first reports, people are a bit upset because some fake news was spread yesterday about a big agreement on these measures. And actually, the only measures approved were the ones announced by the Commission and then by the Eurogroup again. So I think the big news is there is a consensus about the will to find a solution to fund with more money the recovery plan. I think there is big will, and there's hope. There is a common strategy, I hope, and a common will. But there's nothing else more, and we have to wait for June to have more data and to have more instruments and to be more sure about what's going to happen. I think the key point will be the next budget. And you need to understand and be ready to fight if this recovery plan, it's only the new budget for 2021, 2027. It has to be more. And these Eurobonds, for these specific reasons, for these specific plans, we can talk about the Juncker plan, a third Juncker plan being funded with the Corona bonds issued by the Commission. I think would be the right way to upgrade a little bit the budget and the money available. I think more important than the big amount is the emergency of having this money on the ground, having this money available. And we should not forget the money that is available from the European Central Bank, and some people are trying to forget that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I may add one point first, we have now already a certain amount of money flexible, yeah, which is money which are the funds decided by the Eurogroup 2 weeks ago and approved yesterday. So I understand that from June on, there are financial resources available for the states. Of course, they are coming from different sources. But for instance, this SURE program for the unemployed, this is very important in the case of Spain and Italy and Portugal also. These funds are flexible, are ready already, and although the loans from the stability mechanism and also the investment fund. So all in all, 550 billion euros are practically available from June, I understand, from June on. And the funds we are discussing now, the recovery fund, this is for later. It must not be decided yet. And of course, the technical aspects will need some time. But at least from the second half of the year, or very least from New Year on, these funds should be available as well.
Okay. Wilhelm, one last question for you, a tough one. Do you think that this crisis will ultimately bring EU countries closer together or push them further apart?
Well, I think every crisis helps EU to come closer together. Yeah? At the first moment, the Europeans don't know how to react, and there are some critical movements. But at the end of the day, Europe always has been able to leave a closer and more united crisis than when a crisis started. So I'm very optimistic that also after this crisis, Europe will be stronger together, and the instruments we discuss actually shows or indicate in that direction.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you both for a very interesting debate about what lies ahead, and see you soon then. Thank you.